The bullet whizzed past Wyatt Morgan's ear, close enough that he felt the air shift before the sound registered. He didn't flinch. At 22, he'd already grown accustomed to the dance of death that defined the territories in 1878. What he wasn't accustomed to was the woman crouched behind the overturned wagon not 10 feet away, loading a Winchester with hands steady as the Montana mountains. "You planning on helping, Cowboy, or just standing there like a fence post?" she called, her voice cutting through the gunfire. Wyatt's instincts kicked in, and he dove behind the wagon just as another volley of bullets splintered the wood where he'd been standing. He pressed his back against the weathered oak, adjusting his Stetson with one hand while the other drew his Colt. "Wasn't expecting company," he said, risking a glance at the woman beside him. Her eyes met his, the color of summer sage, sharp and unflinching in a face smudged with trail dust. Dark hair escaped from beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and for a moment Wyatt forgot about the men trying to kill them. "Zara McKenzie," she said, extending a hand as casually as if they were meeting at a town social. "And those fellows seem mighty interested in the gold shipment I'm transporting." Wyatt clasped her hand briefly, surprised by the strength in her grip. "Wyatt Morgan. Seems we're sharing this patch of trouble." "3 men," Zara said, nodding toward the rocky outcropping where their attackers had taken position. "I dropped one already." Wyatt's estimation of her notched upward. Most women he knew couldn't handle a rifle, let alone hit a moving target. "You always travel alone with gold shipments, Miss McKenzie." "Mrs.," she corrected, then paused, her expression hardening. Not anymore." She fired 2 shots in quick succession, and a pained cry confirmed at least one had found its mark. "My guards were killed 2 days back." "Been running ever since." Wyatt nodded, understanding the unspoken. "Widowed then, and clearly capable." "On 3, he said, checking his ammunition. "I'll go left, you cover right." Zara nodded, her focus absolute. 1, 2, 3. They moved in perfect synchrony, as if they'd fought together for years. Wyatt rolled to the left, firing twice toward the outcropping while Zara laid down covering fire. The return fire was immediate but scattered, confirming they'd rattled their opponents. Wyatt spotted movement behind a boulder and squeezed off a shot. A man's hat flew into the air, followed by a string of curses. The attack had disrupted whatever plan the bandits had formed, and Wyatt seized the advantage, closing the distance with practiced speed. 20 minutes later, it was over. 2 dead bandits lay sprawled on the rocky ground, while the third had fled on horseback, a trail of blood marking his retreat. Wyatt holstered his Colt, turning to find Zara already securing the horses that had scattered during the firefight. She worked with efficient movements, her posture revealing no sign of the terror most would feel after such an encounter. "You handle yourself well," he said, approaching cautiously. Something about her kept him at a respectful distance. "So do you." She glanced up, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "Ranch hand." "Sometimes," Wyatt admitted. "Been riding with a cattle outfit out of Wyoming, on my way to visit my brother in Silver Creek." "Silver Creek?" Zara's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's where I'm headed, Wells Fargo office there." Wyatt found himself nodding. "Might be safer if we traveled together, at least until we reached town." For the first time, he saw hesitation cross her features. Trust didn't come easy in the territories, especially for a woman traveling alone. "I can handle myself," she said, though there was less conviction in her tone. "No doubt about that," Wyatt agreed. "But 4 eyes are better than 2, and I suspect your friend with the bullet in his arm might have companions." Zara considered this, then gave a curt nod. "First sign of trouble from you, Mr. Morgan, and I'll put a bullet between your eyes faster than you can blink." Wyatt couldn't help but smile. "Yes, madam, I believe you would." They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow beside a creek, the sound of water over stone masking their presence. Wyatt built a small fire, careful to keep it low and shielded by rock formations. Zara set about checking the wagon's contents, ensuring the strongbox remained secure beneath false panels in the wagon bed. "Wells Fargo teaches you that trick?" Wyatt asked, impressed by the craftsmanship of the hiding place. "My husband did," Zara replied, her voice softening momentarily. "William was a carpenter before he signed on as a guard. He built this wagon special." The mention of her husband created a momentary stillness between them. Wyatt busied himself with preparing coffee, giving her space. "How long?" he asked finally. "6 months." Zara accepted the tin cup he offered, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Ambushed near Deadwood. I was in town when it happened." Wyatt nodded, understanding, filling the silence. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, but he could see the grief hiding behind her composure. "That's the territory for you. Gives and takes as it pleases." They sat in companionable silence as night settled around them. The coffee was strong and bitter, but hot, and that was all that mattered after a day like they'd had. "Why Silver Creek?" Zara asked eventually, studying him over the rim of her cup. Wyatt leaned back against his saddle. "My brother Walter runs the livery there. Started up after the mining boom hit last year. Keeps writing me to join him, says there's opportunity for a man willing to work." "And are you willing to work, that is?" The question held no judgment, just curiosity, and Wyatt found himself answering honestly. "Been drifting since the war. Cattle drives, ranch work, whatever pays. Never stayed anywhere long enough to find out what I really want." The war. Zara looked at him with renewed interest. "You're young for a veteran." "Lied about my age," Wyatt admitted. "Signed up at 15, saw the last year of fighting." Understanding dawned in her eyes. Many young men had done the same, eager to prove themselves in a conflict that had torn the nation apart. "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "What's a woman doing running gold shipments through bandit country?" Zara set down her cup, her face illuminated by the firelight. "Same as you, I expect. Surviving. After William died, Wells Fargo offered me his job. They figured no one would suspect a woman of carrying anything valuable." "Smart thinking," Wyatt conceded, "until word got out." "Until word got out," she agreed grimly. "This is my last run. After Silver Creek, I'm done." "What then?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away into the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "Haven't figured that part out yet." Wyatt nodded, understanding all too well the uncertainty of a life without direction. He'd been adrift since Appomattox, moving wherever the wind took him, never putting down roots. "We should get some rest," he said, checking his pocket watch. "Long ride tomorrow if we want to make Silver Creek by nightfall." "I'll take first watch," Zara offered, already reaching for her rifle. Wyatt shook his head. "You've been riding hard for days. Get some sleep. I'm not tired yet." She looked ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. With a nod of gratitude, she settled into her bedroll, rifle still within easy reach. Wyatt watched as her breathing slowed and deepened, marveling at the strange twist of fate that had thrown them together. She was unlike any woman he'd ever met, fierce, independent, yet carrying a sadness that mirrored his own. The night passed quietly, with Wyatt eventually waking Zara for her turn at watch. By dawn, they were already on the trail, the wagon moving at a steady pace toward Silver Creek. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the open plains giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. "Beautiful country," Wyatt commented as they paused to rest the horses near midday. Zara nodded, surveying the valley spread before them. "Too beautiful for all the blood that's been spilled on it." They continued in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The trail narrowed as they entered a pass between two hills, forcing them to proceed single file. Wyatt rode ahead, alert for any sign of danger. That vigilance saved their lives when the ambush came. The first shot struck the wagon's side with a solid thunk. Wyatt reacted instantly, wheeling his horse around and drawing his colt in one fluid motion. "Get down," he shouted to Zara, who was already diving from the wagon seat. 5 riders emerged from the trees above the pass, guns blazing. Wyatt recognized one of them as the wounded man who had escaped the previous day's encounter. Seemed he'd found those companions after all. Wyatt fired twice, emptying one saddle, then spurred his horse toward the protection of a large boulder. Zara had rolled beneath the wagon, her Winchester already cracking with lethal precision. The bandits split up, 2 circling wide while the others maintained fire from the high ground. It was a coordinated attack, far more disciplined than the previous day's ambush. "They knew we were coming," Zara called out, her voice tight with anger. Wyatt nodded grimly. Someone had tipped them off, which meant there was more to this shipment than Zara had let on. A bullet ricocheted off the rock inches from his head, showering him with stone fragments. Wyatt ducked lower, then risked a quick shot at one of the riders attempting to flank them. The man jerked in the saddle but kept his seat, retreating behind a stand of trees. Not good. They were being boxed in with limited ammunition and nowhere to run. "Zara," Wyatt called out. "The wagon's not going to make it through this pass. We need to move now on horseback." She looked at him across the short distance, understanding the implications. Abandoning the wagon meant leaving the gold, but staying meant certain death. "Cover me." She shouted, then darted toward her horse, which had remained remarkably calm despite the gunfire. Wyatt laid down suppressing fire, emptying his Colt before switching to his Winchester. The bandits responded with a volley that splintered the wagon and kicked up dust all around them, but somehow both Wyatt and Zara remained untouched. In a matter of seconds, Zara had swung into the saddle, her horse already moving. Wyatt mounted his own horse, prepared to follow, when he saw her ride not away from the ambush but directly toward the wagon. "What are you doing?" he yelled, but she ignored him. With incredible dexterity, Zara leaned from her saddle, reached beneath the wagon seat, and extracted a small leather pouch. Only then did she wheel her horse around, racing back toward Wyatt. "Now we can go," she called, a fierce grin lighting her face despite the bullets still flying around them. They crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail for the rougher terrain of the hillside. Their horses, both sturdy mountain breeds, handled the slope with surprising agility, putting distance between them and their pursuers. "They'll follow the tracks," Zara shouted over her shoulder. Wyatt nodded, already planning their next move. "Creek up ahead. We'll ride in the water for a spell, throw them off." The cold mountain stream welcomed them minutes later, its swift current carrying away any trace of their passing. They rode upstream for nearly a mile before finding a rocky bank where they could exit without leaving obvious tracks. Only when they reached a densely wooded ridge, with no sign of pursuit, did they finally slow their pace. Both horses were lathered and breathing hard, their sides heaving from the exertion. "That was too close," Wyatt said, dismounting to give his horse a rest. Zara slid from her saddle, the leather pouch clutched tightly in one hand. "They knew exactly where to wait for us." "Someone talked," Wyatt agreed, watching her carefully. "What's in the pouch that's worth all this trouble?" For a moment he thought she might not answer. Then with a sigh she loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. Wyatt's eyes widened, diamonds. At least a dozen of them, catching the filtered sunlight that penetrated the forest canopy. "Not gold," he said quietly. "Not gold," she confirmed. "These are bound for the federal marshal in Silver Creek, evidence in a case against the Blackwell Gang." The name sent a chill through Wyatt. The Blackwell Gang was notorious throughout the territories, responsible for a string of train robberies and murders stretching from Colorado to Montana. "Why didn't you tell me?" Zara's expression hardened. "Because the fewer people who know, the better. William died protecting this secret." "I wasn't about to risk another life." Wyatt wanted to be angry at the deception, but found he couldn't. In her position, he might have done the same. "How far to Silver Creek from here?" he asked instead. "Maybe 15 miles, but we can't take the main trail now." Zara secured the pouch inside her jacket. "There's an old hunting path that loops around to the north. Adds a few hours, but it's safer." Wyatt nodded, trusting her knowledge of the terrain. "Lead on, then." They traveled in silence for a time, alert for any sign of pursuit. The forest gradually thinned as they climbed higher, offering occasional glimpses of the valley below. No riders were visible on the main trail, which could mean either they'd lost their pursuers or the bandits had anticipated their route and were waiting ahead. "Tell me about your brother," Zara said eventually, breaking the tense silence. Wyatt glanced at her, surprised by the request. "Walter, he's 4 years older, steadier than me, always knew what he wanted." And what was that? A place of his own. Land, family roots. Wyatt smiled slightly at the thought. He found it too, married a local girl last year. They're expecting their first child come winter. "You don't sound envious," Zara observed. Wyatt considered this. "Maybe I am in some ways. Walter figured things out. I'm still searching." "For what?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet profound. Wyatt had asked himself the same thing countless times over the years. Purpose, I guess, something that matters. Zara nodded thoughtfully. I understand that. After William died, I felt adrift. This job gave me purpose, even if it was just delivering someone else's valuables. And now, after Silver Creek, she shrugged, though there was uncertainty in the gesture. I have some savings, enough to start fresh somewhere, maybe California. Long way from Montana, Wyatt noted. That's the appeal. A small smile touched her lips. No ghosts there. They crested a ridge as the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. In the distance, nestled in a valley carved by a winding river, lay Silver Creek. Even from this height, they could see the activity of the bustling mining town's smoke from chimneys, wagons moving along the main street, the glint of metal rooftops. We'll reach town by nightfall, Zara said, relief evident in her voice. Wyatt should have felt the same relief, but instead, a strange reluctance settled over him. Their journey was ending, and with it, whatever temporary bond had formed between them. Wyatt, Zara said suddenly, her voice sharp with warning. She pointed to a spot on the trail below them where it curved around a massive boulder. He followed her gaze and saw what had alarmed her. 3 riders, motionless in the shadow of the rock, positioned to intercept anyone approaching from their direction. They guessed our route, Wyatt murmured. Or they have men watching all possible approaches to town. Zara's expression was grim. We need another way in. Wyatt studied the terrain, considering their options. There, he said finally, pointing to a steep ravine that cut through the mountainside. It's rough going, but it'll bring us out behind the livery stables. Zara eyed the precipitous descent dubiously. The horses won't make it down that. No, Wyatt agreed. We'll have to go on foot, lead them as far as we can, then let them go. They'll find their way to water. And us. In the dark, I know these mountains, Wyatt assured her. And the moon will be near full tonight. The decision made, they dismounted and began the arduous descent into the ravine. The going was treacherous, with loose shale underfoot and thick brush impeding their progress. As Wyatt had predicted, they soon reached a point where the horses could go no further. Thank you, old friend, Wyatt murmured, removing his saddle and patting his mount's neck. The horse had served him faithfully for 3 years, carrying him across half the territory without complaint. Zara did the same, whispering something in her horse's ear before sending it off with a gentle slap to the flank. Both animals disappeared into the gathering dusk, heading instinctively toward the valley and its promise of water and grass. With only their weapons, a canteen, and the precious pouch of diamonds, Wyatt and Zara continued their descent. The ravine narrowed as they progressed, forcing them to help each other over fallen logs and around boulder fields. More than once, Wyatt found himself catching Zara's hand to steady her, or feeling her palm against his back as she guided him around a hazard she'd spotted first. Each contact lingered a moment longer than necessary, neither willing to acknowledge the awareness growing between them. Night fell completely before they reached the bottom of the ravine, but as Wyatt had promised, the moon rose full and bright, illuminating their path. They followed a dry creek that gradually widened as it approached the outskirts of Silver Creek. The sound of the town reached them first: piano music from the saloon, the occasional burst of laughter, the distant clang of a blacksmith working late. Then came the smells: wood smoke, cooking food, the distinct aroma of a cattle town. They paused at the edge of town, hidden in the shadows of a stand of cottonwoods. The marshal's office is on the main street, Zara whispered, but if they're watching the town. We need to be careful, Wyatt agreed. Let's circle around to the livery first. Walter will help us. They moved cautiously through the back alleys of Silver Creek, avoiding the pools of light cast by windows and street lamps. The livery stable stood at the edge of town, a large, well-maintained structure with corrals extending behind it. A light burned in the attached house, a welcome sight after their grueling journey. Wyatt approached the back door, motioning for Zara to stay in the shadows. He knocked softly, a distinctive pattern that his brother would recognize. Moments later, the door cracked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man peered out, a shotgun held ready. His expression shifted from wariness to shock as he recognized his visitor. Wyatt, What in tarnation? Let us in, Walt, Wyatt interrupted, quickly. Walter's eyes darted to the shadows where Zara waited, then back to his brother. Without further question, he stepped aside, ushering them both into the warmth of his kitchen. "Sarah," he called out, "put on some coffee, we've got company." A young woman appeared in the doorway, her pregnant belly evident beneath her apron. She took in the scene with surprised eyes but recovered quickly, moving to the stove without comment. "This is my brother Walter and his wife Sarah," Wyatt introduced. "And this is Zara McKenzie." "We've got trouble on our heels." Walter secured the door, then set his shotgun within easy reach. "What kind of trouble?" Zara stepped forward. "I'm carrying evidence for Marshal Jenkins, diamonds stolen by the Blackwell gang. They've been hunting me since Deadwood, killed my husband and the other guards." Sarah gasped, a hand going to her mouth, but Walter merely nodded, his expression grim. "The marshal's been shot," he said quietly. Zara's face paled. "When?" "This morning. Ambush just outside of town." "He's alive, but barely. Doc Simmons has him at the clinic." Wyatt and Zara exchanged alarmed glances. If the marshal was incapacitated, their plan to deliver the diamonds safely had just become considerably more complicated. "Who's acting as marshal?" Wyatt asked. "Deputy Harkins," Walter replied, "but there's talk he might be on Blackwell's payroll. Town's not feeling too secure right now." Sarah placed steaming cups of coffee on the table, along with a plate of biscuits. "You both look half-starved. Eat while you figure this out." Gratefully, Wyatt and Zara sat, the events of the past days suddenly catching up to them. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of food, the momentary safety, it all combined to make Wyatt realize just how exhausted he truly was. "We saw men watching the trails into town," he told Walter between bites. "At least 3 on the north approach." Walter nodded, unsurprised. "There've been strangers in town for 2 days, mean-looking sorts. They're waiting for something or someone." "Me," Zara said softly. "Or rather, what I'm carrying. The diamonds need to get to the federal courthouse in Helena," Wyatt explained. "Without them, the case against Blackwell falls apart." Walter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There's a stage leaving for Helena tomorrow noon. Harkins arranged for extra security, supposedly because of the marshal being shot." "We can't trust Harkins," Zara said firmly. "If he's working for Blackwell, he'll have men waiting to intercept the stage." "What about the train?" Sarah suggested. "The spur line to the Northern Pacific Junction runs twice weekly. Next one leaves at dawn." Wyatt looked at Zara, seeing the calculation in her eyes. "The train would be faster, harder to ambush. But they'll be watching the station," she countered. "Not if they don't know you're in town yet," Walter said. "Far as anyone knows, you're still out there somewhere, trying to find a way in." A plan began to form in Wyatt's mind. "Walt, you still have connections at the telegraph office." "Jim Burke owes me more than a few favors," Walter confirmed. "What are you thinking?" "Send a wire to the federal marshal's office in Helena. Tell them about Jenkins being shot and that we have the evidence. Ask them to send men to meet the train." Zara nodded slowly, seeing the logic. "And if Harkins or his men intercept the telegram?" "That's a risk we'll have to take," Wyatt admitted. "But we need backup in Helena, and we need it waiting when we arrive." Walter stood, determination in his stance. "I'll go now. Jim lives above the office. He'll send it tonight." "Be careful," Sarah said, touching her husband's arm. "Always am, darling." Walter kissed her forehead, then grabbed his coat. "You 3 stay put. I'll be back as soon as I can." After Walter left, Sarah showed them to a small guest room where they could rest. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's clean and warm." "It's perfect," Zara assured her. "Thank you for taking us in like this." Sarah smiled, one hand resting on her belly. "Walter's told me about his little brother for years. I'm glad to finally meet you, even under these circumstances." When she'd gone, closing the door softly behind her, Wyatt and Zara were left in awkward silence. The room contained a single bed, a washstand, and a chair. "Take the bed," Wyatt said immediately. "I'll manage with the chair." Zara looked ready to argue, then sighed, too exhausted for pride. "Wake me in a few hours. We'll trade." She removed her hat and jacket but kept her boots on, ready to move at a moment's notice. The pouch of diamonds remained secured inside her shirt. As she stretched out on the bed, Wyatt couldn't help but notice how the moonlight streaming through the window illuminated her face, softening the hard lines that days of tension had etched there. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. Wyatt shook his head, embarrassed to be caught staring. "Nothing, just, you remind me of someone." Who? He settled into the chair, considering the question. "My mother, maybe. She had that same look like she could face down the devil himself and not blink." Zara's expression softened slightly. "Is she still alive?" "No," Wyatt said quietly. "Influenza, winter of '67. Dad followed her a year later. I'm sorry." The words were simple but sincere. Wyatt shrugged, an old gesture to deflect the pain that never quite faded. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long," Zara observed. "You were what, 17, around that?" "Walter was already out west by then. I had nothing keeping me in Kentucky, so I drifted. And you've been drifting ever since." It wasn't a question, but Wyatt answered anyway. "Seems that way." Zara studied him in the moonlight, her eyes thoughtful. "What will you do after this?" "After we deliver the diamonds." The question caught Wyatt off guard. He'd been so focused on their immediate situation that he hadn't thought beyond reaching Helena safely. "Walter wants me to stay here, help with the livery," he said finally. "Might be time to put down some roots." "Might be," Zara agreed, something unreadable in her expression. "Good night, Wyatt, good night," he replied, watching as she turned toward the wall. Soon her breathing deepened, but sleep eluded Wyatt. His mind raced with thoughts of the journey ahead, the dangers they still faced, and increasingly, the woman sleeping just a few feet away. He'd known her less than 2 days, yet something about Zara McKenzie had gotten under his skin. Her courage, her resilience, the flashes of vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, all of it combined to create a woman unlike any he'd ever met. Walter returned shortly before midnight, his expression grim. "Telegraph sent," he reported in a low voice, careful not to wake Zara. "But there's more trouble. Harkins has deputies watching the train station, and there's talk in town about a woman carrying something valuable for the marshal." Wyatt cursed under his breath. "They know she's coming." "Seems that way," Walter agreed, "but they don't know she's already here." "We need a different plan," Wyatt said, glancing at Zara's sleeping form. Walter nodded thoughtfully. "I might have an idea, risky, but it could work." By the time Zara awoke, the brothers had formulated a new strategy. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to creep through the window as they explained it to her over a breakfast of eggs and coffee. "A distraction at the south end of town," Walter said, "while you two slip onto the train from the north siding where they load freight. I've arranged for a cattle shipment this morning. You can hide among the drovers." Zara considered this, fork paused midway to her mouth. "What kind of distraction?" "A fight," Wyatt explained. "Walter knows some miners who owe him favors. They'll start something big enough to draw attention. And dangerous enough that Harkins will have to send his men to break it up," Walter added. Sarah entered the kitchen, carrying a bundle of clothing. "These should fit you," she told Zara. "You'll attract less attention dressed as a man." Zara examined the clothes: pants, shirt, vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that would hide her face. "Clever," she admitted. "When do we move?" "Train leaves at 6:30, Walter said. "The distraction starts at 6. That gives you about 20 minutes to get aboard before it pulls out." The plan set, they finished breakfast quickly. Zara changed into the men's clothing, tucking her hair up under the hat. The transformation was remarkable at a distance. Few would question her gender. "How do I look?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice as she struck a pose. Wyatt found himself momentarily speechless. Even in men's clothing, there was something undeniably captivating about her. "Like a very short cowboy," he managed finally, earning a rare smile that transformed her face. Walter cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "You'd best get moving. Take the back alley to Mason Street, then cut through the lumberyard. I'll meet you at the freight siding." With quick goodbyes to Sarah, Wyatt and Zara slipped out into the gray dawn. The town was beginning to stir, smoke rising from chimneys as businesses prepared to open for the day. They moved cautiously, staying in shadows and avoiding the main streets. The lumberyard provided excellent cover, stacks of timber creating a maze that shielded them from view. As they neared the railroad siding, Wyatt spotted 2 men lounging near the passenger platform, their posture casual but their eyes alert. Harkin's men, he whispered to Zara, pulling her behind a stack of lumber. She nodded, hand instinctively checking that the diamond pouch was secure inside her shirt. How much longer until the distraction? Wyatt consulted his pocket watch. 10 minutes. They waited in tense silence, watching as workers began loading freight onto the train's rear cars. Cattle were being herded into stock cars further down the line, the animals lowing in protest at the confinement. Right on schedule, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Even from this distance, they could hear shouting, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. The effect was immediate. The two men watching the platform straightened, exchanging glances before hurrying toward the disturbance. Other townsfolk moved in the same direction, drawn by the promise of excitement. "Now," Wyatt said, taking Zara's elbow and guiding her toward the freight siding. Walter was waiting as promised, directing workers loading crates into a boxcar. He spotted them immediately, but gave no sign of recognition beyond a slight nod. "Those two going to Helena," he told the foreman, pointing to Wyatt and Zara. "Part of the cattle crew." The foreman barely spared them a glance, too busy with his manifest to question the addition. "Get aboard, then. We're pulling out in 5 minutes." They climbed into the boxcar, finding space among crates labeled for delivery to various Helena businesses. Walter passed up a small bundle. "Food for the journey," he said, then lowered his voice. "Telegram came back from Helena just before I left. Federal marshals will meet the train." Relief washed over Wyatt. "Thank you, Walt, for everything." His brother gripped his hand firmly. "Be careful, both of you." With a final nod to Zara, Walter disappeared into the growing crowd of onlookers gathered to watch the train's departure. The boxcar door remained open as the train began to move, offering a view of Silver Creek falling away behind them. The distraction at the saloon was still in progress. A crowd gathered outside the building while men shouted and gesticulated. "Your brother's a good man," Zara said, settling against a crate. Wyatt nodded, watching as the town receded. "The best I know." The train picked up speed, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails creating a hypnotic backdrop to their thoughts. For the first time in days, Wyatt felt the tension begin to ease from his shoulders. They weren't safe yet, not by any means, but they'd cleared the first major hurdle. Zara opened the bundle Walter had provided, revealing bread, cheese, dried beef, and a flask that proved to contain decent whiskey. "Breakfast of champions," she said with a small smile, offering Wyatt the first share. They ate in companionable silence as the train wound its way through the mountains, the landscape changing from pine forests to rocky outcroppings and back again. The journey to Helena would take approximately 4 hours, time enough to rest and prepare for whatever awaited them at their destination. "You never finished telling me," Wyatt said eventually, "what you plan to do after Helena." Zara brushed crumbs from her borrowed pants, considering the question. "I meant what I said about California. Seems like a place where a person could start fresh." Alone, the word hung between them, loaded with more meaning than Wyatt had intended. Zara glanced up, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "That was the plan," she said slowly. Wyatt nodded, uncertain how to interpret her response. "It's a big country out west, plenty of opportunity for those willing to take risks. You're considering it too." There was a careful neutrality in her tone, but her eyes betrayed interest. "Maybe," Wyatt admitted. "Walter's offer is tempting, but Silver Creek isn't big enough for what you're looking for," Zara finished for him. "Something like that." He smiled ruefully. "Though I'm not entirely sure what I am looking for," Zara studied him thoughtfully. "I think you are. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet." Before Wyatt could respond, the train began to slow, the change in rhythm drawing their attention. They'd been traveling less than an hour, far too soon to be approaching Helena. "Something's wrong," Wyatt said, moving to the door. The train was indeed slowing, though no station was visible ahead. As Wyatt peered out, he spotted riders paralleling the tracks, 5 or 6 men moving with purpose. "We've got company," he told Zara, reaching for his Colt. She joined him at the door, eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "Blackwell's men, they must have been tipped off, or they were watching all the trails out of Silver Creek, Wyatt suggested grimly. Either way, they found us. The train continued to decelerate, and now they could see the reason. A barricade had been constructed across the tracks ahead, forcing the engineer to brake or risk derailment. "They're stopping the whole train for us," Zara said, a mixture of disbelief and anger in her voice. "Determined bunch," Wyatt agreed. "We need to move. Once the train stops, they'll search every car." They gathered their meager belongings quickly, Wyatt checking his weapons while Zara secured the diamond pouch. The train was still moving, but barely, the wheels creaking as they fought against the brakes. "There," Zara pointed to a wooded slope that ran alongside the tracks. "If we jump now, we can make the tree line before they see us." Wyatt nodded, though the prospect of leaping from even a slow-moving train wasn't appealing. "Ladies first," he said with a forced smile. Zara rolled her eyes at him. "Together," she countered, gripping his hand. "On 3. They counted in unison, then jumped, hitting the ground with jarring force but managing to keep their footing. Without pausing to check if they'd been spotted, they sprinted for the trees, reaching their shelter just as shouts erupted from the direction of the train. "They've seen us," Wyatt panted, pulling Zara deeper into the forest. They ran uphill, using the trees for cover, the sounds of pursuit growing behind them. Wyatt's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They were in unfamiliar territory, outnumbered and outgunned. Their only advantage was the dense forest, which could provide hiding places but would eventually thin out higher up the mountain. "We need to split up," Zara said suddenly, pulling her hand from his grip. Wyatt stopped, turning to face her. "What? No, it makes sense," she insisted. "I'll take the diamonds, head north toward the ridge. You go east, make them think you have the package. We'll rendezvous at Helena." "Absolutely not," Wyatt said firmly. "We stick together." Zara's expression hardened with determination. "This isn't about us, Wyatt. It's about getting these diamonds to Helena. If we both get caught, it's over." "And if you get caught alone?" he challenged. "I won't," she said with more confidence than the situation warranted. "I've been evading these men for days. I know what I'm doing." Wyatt wanted to argue further, but the sounds of their pursuers were growing closer. Horses couldn't navigate easily through the dense underbrush, forcing the men to proceed on foot, but they were gaining ground nonetheless. 2 hours north of Helena is a place called Widow's Creek, Wyatt said finally, recognizing the logic in her plan even as he hated it. "If we get separated, meet me there in 3 days." Zara nodded, her expression softening momentarily. "Widow's Creek, 3 days." She hesitated, then stepped forward and pressed something into his hand. "Take this, in case they catch me." Wyatt looked down. In his palm lay a small diamond, one of the dozen or so from the pouch. "Zara, insurance," she said simply. "Now go, make noise, draw them east." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared into the underbrush, moving with the silent grace of someone accustomed to the wilderness. Wyatt watched her go, a knot forming in his chest that had nothing to do with their current danger. Forcing himself to focus, he moved in the opposite direction, deliberately making more noise than necessary. As expected, the sounds of pursuit shifted, following his trail rather than Zara's. Wyatt picked up his pace, putting distance between himself and their hunters while still ensuring they remained interested in his trail. For nearly an hour, he led them on a chase through the forest, using every trick he'd learned in years of frontier living to stay just ahead of capture. He crossed streams, doubled back on his trail, and at one point climbed a tree and waited while his pursuers passed beneath him, cursing his apparent ability to vanish. Only when he was certain they were thoroughly confused did Wyatt begin making his way north, in the direction Zara had gone. He had no intention of continuing to Helena without her, regardless of their agreement. The diamond in his pocket was a weight he didn't want to carry alone. The forest began to thin as he climbed higher, offering glimpses of the valley below. The train was gone, presumably allowed to continue once the bandits had confirmed their quarry was no longer aboard. Wyatt scanned the mountainside, searching for any sign of Zara or their pursuers, but saw only the occasional movement of wildlife. As the day progressed, clouds gathered overhead, the temperature dropping noticeably. Wyatt pulled his jacket tighter, concerned not just for himself but for Zara, dressed only in the light clothing Walter had provided. If she was still moving, she might stay warm enough, but if she'd been forced to hide and wait. A gunshot echoed across the mountain, followed by another. Wyatt froze, trying to pinpoint the direction. The sound had come from the north, perhaps half a mile away. Without hesitation, he changed course, moving toward the disturbance. The terrain grew steeper, forcing him to use his hands at times to maintain his balance. The gunfire had ceased, leaving an ominous silence broken only by the wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. Wyatt paused at the edge of a small clearing, senses alert for any sign of danger. A movement caught his eye, someone crossing the open space ahead, moving rapidly but with a slight limp. He recognized Zara's gait immediately, relief flooding through him. He stepped into the clearing, raising a hand in greeting. Zara, she whirled, rifle raised, then lowered it as she recognized him. "Wyatt, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he said, closing the distance between them. "I heard shots." "Two of them found me," she explained, her breathing labored. "I took care of it, but there are more coming." Now that he was closer, Wyatt could see that her borrowed shirt was torn at the shoulder, a dark stain spreading across the fabric. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she dismissed, though her pallor suggested otherwise. "We need to keep moving." Wyatt shook his head, taking her uninjured arm. "Let me see." Reluctantly, Zara allowed him to examine the wound, a bullet graze that had torn through flesh but appeared to have missed anything vital. Still, it was bleeding freely and the risk of infection was high. "We need to clean this," he said, already reaching for his canteen. "Later," Zara insisted. "They'll be here any minute." As if to emphasize her point, voices carried to them on the wind, men calling to each other, organizing a search pattern. They were closer than Wyatt had realized. "This way," he said, guiding her toward a rocky outcropping that promised better cover. "We can lose them in the high country." They moved as quickly as Zara's injury would allow, the voices behind them growing fainter as they ascended. The clouds that had been gathering all day finally released their burden, a cold rain beginning to fall that would both help hide their tracks and make survival more challenging. "There's a line shack near here," Wyatt said, recalling a hunting trip with Walter years earlier. "Used by shepherds in the summer months. If we can find it, we'll have shelter for the night." Zara nodded, her face set with determination despite the pain she must be feeling. "Lead the way." The rain intensified as they searched, soaking through their clothing and chilling them to the bone. Darkness was falling rapidly, limiting visibility and making each step treacherous on the rain-slick stones. Just when Wyatt was beginning to fear they'd have to spend the night exposed to the elements, he spotted the weathered outline of a small structure nestled against the mountainside. "There," he said, pointing through the gloom. "The shack." They approached cautiously, wary of potential occupants, but the cabin appeared long abandoned. Its single room contained a crude bunk, a small stone fireplace, and little else, but it was dry and defensible, precisely what they needed. Wyatt secured the door while Zara sank onto the bunk, her reserves of strength finally depleted. The diamond pouch remained tucked securely inside her shirt, but her face was alarmingly pale in the dim light. "Let me see that wound properly," Wyatt said, gathering what supplies he could find in the sparse cabin. To his relief, there was a small store of firewood stacked beside the hearth, dry enough to catch with careful tending. Within minutes, he had a small fire burning, providing both light and much-needed warmth. Zara allowed him to help her remove the blood-soaked shirt, leaving her in a thin undershirt that clung to her damp skin. The bullet graze looked angry and inflamed, but the bleeding had slowed to a trickle. "Could be worse," Wyatt commented as he cleaned the wound with water from his canteen. "Doesn't look like there's any debris in it." Zara winced as he worked but made no sound of complaint. "I've had worse," she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Wyatt found a relatively clean cloth in his saddlebag and tore it into strips for bandaging. As he worked to dress the wound, he was acutely aware of Zara's proximity, of the trust she was placing in him. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked suddenly, her eyes searching his face. "You could have gone on to Helena with the diamond I gave you." Wyatt's hands stilled momentarily. "That was never an option. Why not? It would have been the sensible choice. Maybe I'm not feeling particularly sensible, he replied, securing the bandage with careful fingers. Zara studied him, something vulnerable in her expression that she'd kept hidden until now. I'm not worth risking your life for, Wyatt. I disagree, he said simply, meeting her gaze steadily. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and emotions neither was ready to name. Finally, Zara looked away, a slight flush coloring her cheeks that had nothing to do with her injury. We should try to dry our clothes, she said, changing the subject. Hypothermia's as dangerous as any bullet. Wyatt nodded, accepting the shift in conversation. They arranged their outer garments near the fire, careful to maintain a respectful distance from each other in the small confines of the shack. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming on the roof and creating a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the world. Do you think they're still searching? Zara asked, huddled in a blanket Wyatt had found in a dusty trunk. Not in this weather, he replied, adding another log to the fire. They'll wait for morning same as us. Then what? We can't stay here. Wyatt considered their options. The rain should let up by dawn. We'll head northwest, skirt around Helena and approach from a direction they won't expect. And if they've set up a perimeter around the city, then we get creative, he said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. One problem at a time. Zara smiled faintly. Is that your philosophy? One problem at a time. Has been for years, Wyatt admitted. Got me this far. And where is this far exactly? There was genuine curiosity in her question, not judgment. Wyatt considered his answer carefully. Further than I expected in some ways. Not as far as I'd hoped in others. That's cryptic, Zara observed. Life's cryptic, he countered with a slight smile. Yours included, I'd wager. She didn't deny it, instead pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I never planned to be a widow at 25, transporting stolen diamonds across the territory with a price on my head. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. That it does. Zara's gaze drifted to the fire, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. William and I had plans. A home in Denver, maybe children eventually, normal things. Wyatt sensed the grief behind her words, still raw despite the months that had passed. He must have been a remarkable man. He was kind, Zara said softly. That's rarer than you might think, especially out here. Kindness without weakness. I'm sorry you lost him, Wyatt said sincerely. Zara nodded, accepting his sympathy without comment. After a moment she asked, what about you? Ever been married? No, Wyatt replied. Came close once back in Kentucky, before the war. What happened? I left, he said simply. Joined up, went east. By the time I came back, she'd married a shopkeeper who hadn't gone to fight. Can't blame her for that. And since then, Wyatt shrugged. Hard to court a woman properly when you're moving every few months. Never seemed fair to make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Zara's expression softened with understanding. So instead you kept moving, taking one problem at a time. Something like that, he agreed. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them as the rain continued its steady drumming on the roof. Despite the danger that awaited them come morning, Wyatt found himself strangely content in that moment, sharing a simple fire with a woman who understood the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Eventually, exhaustion overtook them both. Wyatt insisted Zara take the bunk while he made do with his bedroll on the floor near the fire. She protested briefly but was too weary to argue for long, her body's need for rest overriding pride. Wyatt, she said as she settled onto the narrow bunk, thank you for coming back. He smiled in the firelight. Get some rest, we've got a long day ahead. Sleep came swiftly for Zara, her breathing deepening into the rhythm of exhaustion. Wyatt remained awake a while longer, listening to the rain and watching the play of firelight across her features. In repose, the hardness fell away from her face, revealing the woman beneath the tough exterior younger than she seemed, vulnerable in ways she'd never admit while awake. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having passed during the night to leave a washed, clean sky and glistening landscape. Wyatt woke first, stirring the embers of their fire to life and checking outside for any sign of pursuit. Finding none, he allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Any coffee in this place? Zara's sleep-roughened voice came from behind him. Wyatt turned to find her sitting up, hair tousled but eyes alert. Afraid not, but I did find this. He held up a jar of preserved peaches, discovered on a high shelf the night before. Breakfast of champions, she said with a smile, echoing her words from the train. They shared the sweet fruit, using the juice to wash down the last of the hard bread Walter had provided. Zara's wound looked better in the morning light, the inflammation reduced and no sign of infection setting in. "How does it feel?" Wyatt asked as he helped her change the bandage. "Stiff but manageable," she replied, rotating her shoulder experimentally. "I can shoot if I need to." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Wyatt said, though they both knew the likelihood of reaching Helena without further confrontation was slim. With their clothes now dry and their meager breakfast consumed, they prepared to depart. The diamond pouch was once again secured within Zara's clothing, and both had checked their weapons carefully. "Northwest, you said," Zara confirmed, studying the terrain visible through the cabin's single window. Wyatt nodded. "There's a trader's route that skirts the main trails. Less traveled, but it'll get us close to Helena by nightfall." "Lead on then," she said, adjusting her hat. "The sooner we deliver these diamonds, the sooner we can stop looking over our shoulders." They set out under a brilliant blue sky, the air crisp and clean after the rain. The higher elevation offered expansive views of the valley below, including distant glimpses of Helena itself. A sprawling settlement nestled between hills, with the gleam of its more substantial buildings visible, even from this distance. Progress was slower than Wyatt would have liked, constrained by Zara's injury and the need for caution. They stayed off ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky, choosing instead to travel just below the crest where trees offered cover. By midday, they had covered perhaps half the distance to Helena, with no sign of pursuit. The trader's route Wyatt remembered proved more overgrown than he recalled, suggesting it had fallen out of regular use, but this worked to their advantage, less chance of encountering others. They paused to rest in a sheltered hollow, sharing the last of their water. Zara had been quiet throughout the morning, her focus on the path ahead, but now she turned to Wyatt with a contemplative expression. "If we make it to Helena," she began, "and deliver the diamonds safely, what then?" The question caught him off guard, not for its content, but for the implication behind it that she was considering what came after, perhaps even what came next for them. "I haven't thought that far ahead," Wyatt admitted, though it wasn't entirely true. He had been thinking, more than he cared to acknowledge, about what might happen once their shared mission was complete. "Liar," Zara said, but there was a smile in her voice. "You've been thinking about it since Silver Creek." Wyatt couldn't deny it. "Maybe I have. And—" He met her gaze directly. "And I'm not sure California is far enough away to outrun your ghosts, or mine." Zara's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtfulness that made her look both older and more vulnerable. "Perhaps not, but it might be far enough to start fresh, together." The word slipped out before Wyatt could consider its implications. Zara didn't answer immediately, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sign that would guide her response. Finally, she said, "I barely know you, Wyatt Morgan." "That's not what I asked," he pointed out gently. She opened her mouth to reply, then tensed suddenly, her attention shifting to something over his shoulder. "Riders," she whispered, reaching for her rifle. Wyatt turned, following her gaze. Through the trees, he could see movement on the ridge they had been avoiding, 3 men on horseback, scanning the landscape below. Whether they were Blackwell's men or simply travelers, it was impossible to tell from this distance. "Down," Wyatt whispered, pulling Zara into the deeper cover of a pine thicket. They watched in tense silence as the riders conferred, then separated, 2 heading west while 1 continued along the ridge in their general direction. The man was moving slowly, clearly searching for something or someone. "He's tracking us," Zara murmured, her body pressed close to Wyatt's in their hiding place. Wyatt nodded grimly. The rain had washed away most signs of their passage, but not all. An experienced tracker would notice broken twigs, disturbed earth, the subtle signs that humans had passed recently. "We need to move," he said. "But not yet. Wait until he's past us." They remained motionless as the rider drew closer, his attention focused on the ground. He was a hard-looking man with a weather-beaten face and the practiced scan of someone who had hunted both animals and men. He carried a rifle across his saddle, ready for immediate use. When he was less than 50 yards away, his horse suddenly raised its head, nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. The man immediately reined in, his hand moving to his rifle as he peered in their direction. "Run," Wyatt whispered, already pulling Zara to her feet. They burst from cover as the first shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark where they had been hiding seconds before. Wyatt fired back, not aiming to hit, but to force the rider to take cover and buy them precious seconds. They ran downhill, using the trees for protection, the sounds of pursuit close behind. The rider had dismounted, following on foot where his horse couldn't easily pass. He was shouting now, calling to his companions who were somewhere to the west. "We need to split them up," Zara panted as they paused briefly behind a fallen log. Wyatt nodded, his mind racing. "There's a creek ahead. Follow it downstream. I'll lead him west, then circle back to find you." "No," Zara said firmly. "We tried separating before. It almost got us both killed." "We don't have a choice," Wyatt insisted. "3 of them, 2 of us. We need to divide their forces." Before she could argue further, he pressed the diamond he'd been carrying into her hand. "Take this. All the evidence stays with you. I'll find you, I promise." Zara looked at the diamond, then back at him, conflict evident in her expression. "Wyatt, trust me," he said simply. Something in his face must have convinced her, for she nodded reluctantly. "Downstream, I'll wait for you where the creek bends east. Don't be long." "I won't," he promised. With a final glance that held more emotion than either was prepared to acknowledge, they separated Zara, heading for the creek while Wyatt moved west, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. As he'd hoped, the tracker followed him, shouting to his companions about the direction of his pursuit. Wyatt led him on a chase designed to maximize confusion, crisscrossing his own trail and using every trick he knew to create false leads. When he was certain the man was thoroughly disoriented, Wyatt began making his way back toward the creek, moving with the stealth he'd perfected in years of hunting. He encountered no sign of the other 2 riders, which could mean either they had failed to find Zara or they had already captured her. The thought spurred him to greater speed, caution momentarily forgotten in his concern. The creek came into view through the trees, its water running clear and cold over smooth stones. Wyatt followed it downstream, eyes scanning constantly for any sign of Zara or their pursuers. He found her at the bend, concealed in a hollow beneath the creek bank, rifle ready. The relief that washed over her face when she recognized him was matched by his own. "Any trouble?" he asked, dropping down beside her. She shook her head. "None, you." "Lost him in the high country," Wyatt confirmed. "But they'll regroup soon. We need to keep moving." They continued downstream, using the water to hide their tracks, then cut east toward Helena. The sun was beginning its westward descent, the shadows lengthening as afternoon waned toward evening. They pushed on relentlessly, knowing that darkness would provide both cover and challenges of its own. As twilight gathered around them, the first lights of Helena became visible through the trees, a welcome sight after their grueling journey. But between them and the safety of the town lay open ground, nearly half a mile of exposure where they would be vulnerable to anyone watching. "We'll wait for full dark," Wyatt decided, guiding Zara to a sheltered position where they could observe the approaches to town. She nodded, clearly exhausted but unwilling to show weakness. Her injured shoulder had begun bleeding again, a dark stain spreading slowly across the fresh bandage Wyatt had applied during their brief rest earlier. "Almost there," he said encouragingly, noting her pallor. "Just a little longer." Zara managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've come too far to fail now." They waited as the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing in a clear canopy overhead. The town grew more distinct as lamps were lit, creating a constellation of human habitation that mirrored the heavens. When full darkness had settled, they began their final approach, moving carefully across the open ground. They were perhaps halfway to the outskirts of town when Wyatt froze, instinct warning him an instant before he heard the soft click of a hammer being cocked. "That's far enough," a voice said from the darkness to their right. Wyatt's hand moved toward his gun but stopped at the next words. "I wouldn't if I were you. There are 3 rifles aimed at you right now." Slowly, Wyatt and Zara raised their hands. From the shadows emerged the 3 riders they had evaded earlier, now on foot and positioned to cut off any escape route. "Well, well," said the tracker, stepping forward. "Mrs. McKenzie, I presume. Mr. Blackwell sends his regards." Zara's expression hardened, but she remained silent. "And you," the man continued, turning to Wyatt, "you've led us quite a chase. Impressive, but ultimately futile." "What do you want?" Wyatt asked, playing for time, his mind racing for a way out of their predicament. The tracker smiled unpleasantly. "Don't play dumb, cowboy. We want what the lady's carrying. Those diamonds belong to Mr. Blackwell." "They were stolen in the first place," Zara said coldly. "They're evidence of Blackwell's crimes." "That's not for me to judge, madam. I just collect what I'm paid to collect." The tracker gestured with his rifle. "Now, hand over the pouch, nice and slow." Wyatt glanced at Zara, trying to communicate some plan, some strategy, but she was already reaching inside her shirt, her movements deliberate. The tracker stepped forward to receive the pouch, his attention momentarily focused on the prize rather than his prisoners. It was the only opening they would get. Wyatt moved with explosive speed, knocking the rifle aside as he drove his shoulder into the tracker's midsection. The man went down hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Zara reacted with equal quickness, diving for cover as the other 2 men raised their weapons. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes illuminating the night in stark bursts. Wyatt rolled away from the tracker, drawing his Colt and firing at the nearest attacker. The man cried out, clutching his arm, but remained standing. His companion was more cautious, using the darkness for cover as he circled to get a better angle. Zara's rifle cracked once, twice, forcing him back. The tracker was recovering, reaching for his fallen weapon. Wyatt kicked it away, then delivered a solid blow to the man's jaw that left him stunned. The second man was still mobile despite his wound, exchanging fire with Zara from behind a boulder. Wyatt was moving to assist her when pain exploded in his side, a burning, tearing sensation that drove the breath from his lungs. He staggered, realizing too late that the third man had flanked him during the confusion. "Wyatt," Zara's voice seemed to come from very far away. He tried to turn, to bring his Colt to bear, but his body wasn't responding properly. The world tilted, the starlit sky spinning above him as he fell. More gunfire, shouting, the thunder of approaching horses, all of it blurred together as darkness encroached on Wyatt's vision. His last clear sight was of Zara, illuminated by a muzzle flash, her face a mask of desperate determination as she fought on alone. Then nothing. Wyatt returned to consciousness in stages, first aware of pain, then of voices murmuring nearby, and finally of a hand clasping his own. He opened his eyes to find himself in an unfamiliar room, sunlight streaming through curtained windows to pool on a wooden floor. "Welcome back." The voice drew his attention to the chair beside his bed, where Zara sat watching him with an expression that mingled relief and something deeper, more complex. "What happened?" His voice emerged as a croak, his throat dry from disuse. "You got shot," she said simply. "Federal marshals arrived just in time. They'd been watching the approaches to town, waiting for us." Memory returned in fragments: the ambush, the firefight, the searing pain in his side. "The diamonds, safe," Zara assured him, "already logged as evidence. Blackwell's being brought in from Wyoming to stand trial." Wyatt tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at whatever damage the bullet had done. Zara immediately reached to support him, her hands gentle but firm as she arranged pillows behind his back. "How long?" he asked. 3 days, she replied. "The doctor wasn't sure you'd make it that first night. You lost a lot of blood." Now that he was more upright, Wyatt could see that they were in a small but well-appointed room, likely in a boarding house or hotel. A doctor's bag sat on a nearby table, alongside a basin and clean bandages. "Where are we, Helena?" Zara said. "The marshals arranged for us to stay here while you recovered. It's safer than the hotel, less visible." Wyatt nodded, taking in this information. Then, looking more closely at Zara, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the weariness in her posture. "Have you been here the whole time?" She glanced away, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die in your sleep." "Thank you," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "For everything." Zara met his gaze again, something vulnerable in her expression. "I should be thanking you. If you hadn't come along when you did, I'd never have made it this far." "I think you would have," Wyatt said with conviction. "You're the most capable person I've ever met, Zara McKenzie." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "High praise coming from a man who's traveled as widely as you have." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken words and possibilities. Finally, Wyatt asked the question that had been in his mind since he awakened. "What happens now?" Zara's smile faded, replaced by thoughtfulness. "The marshals have asked me to testify at Blackwell's trial. That's weeks away, possibly months. And after that." She hesitated, then said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said, about California not being far enough to outrun ghosts." Wyatt waited, sensing she had more to say. "Maybe it's not about outrunning them," she continued. "Maybe it's about finding a reason to stop running altogether." "And have you?" Wyatt asked, his heart beating faster despite his weakened state. "Found a reason." Zara looked down at their still joined hands, then back to his face. "I might have," she admitted, "though it's not what I expected." "Life rarely is," Wyatt said softly. "The marshals offered me a job," she continued, changing direction slightly. "As a special courier, they were impressed by how I handled the diamond shipment despite everything that went wrong." "Are you going to take it?" "I'm considering it," she said. "It would mean staying in Montana, at least for a while. They have an office in Silver Creek, as it happens." Wyatt couldn't help but smile at the mention of his brother's town. Silver Creek's a good place, growing fast but still has that small town feel. "So I've heard," Zara said, watching him carefully. "I also heard the livery there might be looking for a partner, someone good with horses who knows the territory." The implication was clear, and warmth spread through Wyatt's chest that had nothing to do with his injury. "Is that so?" She confirmed. "Though I imagine such a position would require a man willing to settle down, put down roots." "And if such a man were found," Wyatt asked, his voice low, "would there be additional incentives to consider Silver Creek over, say, California?" Zara's eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and something warmer, more inviting. "I believe there might be," she said softly, "for the right man." The unspoken hung between them, a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but both could see clearly now. Wyatt squeezed her hand, a promise in the gesture. "I'll need a few weeks to recover," he said, "and you have a trial to prepare for, but after that." "After that," Zara agreed, "we can discuss those incentives in more detail." She leaned forward then, her free hand coming up to touch his face with a gentleness that belied her usual strength. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, acknowledging the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. Then, with a deliberateness that made Wyatt's breath catch, Zara closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then growing in confidence as Wyatt responded. It was a first kiss for them, both her first since William's death, and his first that had ever mattered this much, that had ever felt like a beginning rather than a momentary pleasure. When they finally parted, Wyatt knew with absolute certainty that this was the only kiss he would ever want for the rest of his life. And from the look in Zara's eyes, she felt the same. "Well," she said, a slight tremor in her voice belying her attempted casualness, "that's certainly one incentive to consider Silver Creek." Wyatt laughed, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound but unable to contain his joy. "I'd say it's a compelling argument." "I thought you might," Zara replied, her smile lighting her entire face. "And there's plenty more where that came from once you're healed up properly." "In that case," Wyatt said, settling back against the pillows with renewed determination, "I'd better get to mending right away." True to his word, Wyatt recovered quickly, driven by both excellent medical care and the motivation of Zara's presence. By the time 6 weeks had passed, he was almost back to full strength, with only an occasional twinge to remind him of how close he'd come to death. During that time, Zara prepared her testimony for Blackwell's trial, working closely with the federal marshals to ensure their case was airtight. The diamonds had been authenticated and secured, their value estimated at over $20,000, a fortune that would have allowed Blackwell to expand his criminal empire had he recovered them. Wyatt sent word to Walter about their plans, receiving an enthusiastic reply that included an official offer of partnership in the livery. Silver Creek was growing rapidly, Walter wrote, and with it the need for good horses and men who knew how to handle them. The trial itself was a tense affair, with Blackwell's men making thinly veiled threats against all who testified. But with federal marshals providing security and the evidence overwhelming, the outcome was never really in doubt. Jeremiah Blackwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, his gang scattered or captured in the aftermath. On a crisp autumn morning in 1878, Wyatt and Zara boarded the train for Silver Creek, their few possessions packed in trunks, their future stretching before them like the endless Montana sky. "Nervous?" Wyatt asked as they settled into their seats, the station of Helena falling away behind them. Zara considered the question, her hand resting comfortably in his. "Not nervous," she decided, "just ready to stop running and see what happens next." Wyatt squeezed her hand, understanding perfectly what she meant. For both of them, life had been a series of temporary situations, of looking over shoulders and preparing for the next move. The prospect of staying in one place, of building something lasting, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Together," he said simply. Zara smiled, leaning against his shoulder as the train gathered speed. "Together," she agreed. Silver Creek welcomed them with unseasonable warmth, the late October sun bathing the town in golden light as they stepped from the train. Walter was waiting on the platform, his face breaking into a wide grin as he spotted them. "About time you showed up," he called, striding forward to envelop Wyatt in a bear hug. "Was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "Not a chance," Wyatt assured him, returning the embrace before stepping back to introduce Zara. "Walter, this is Zara McKenzie. Zara, my brother Walter." Walter took her hand with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Madam, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Wyatt's letters have been full of nothing but praise for your courage," Zara smiled, instantly warming to Walter's straightforward manner. "The pleasure's mine, and please call me Zara." "Only if you'll call me Walt," he countered with a wink. "Now let's get your things to the house. Sarah's been cooking all day, and if we're late for dinner, she'll have my hide." The house Walter had prepared for them was a small but solid structure on the edge of town, close enough to the livery for convenience, but with enough land around it to offer privacy. It had 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a front porch that caught the evening sun perfectly. "It's not much," Walter apologized as he showed them around, "but it's sound, and there's room to expand if you find you need it." Zara walked through the rooms slowly, her fingers trailing over surfaces, her expression one of wonder. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Later, after a sumptuous welcome dinner at Walter and Sarah's home, Wyatt and Zara sat on their own front porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The town sounds were muted at this distance, a piano playing in the saloon, the occasional shout of greeting, the distant whistle of the night train heading west. "Happy?" Wyatt asked, his arm around Zara's shoulders as they shared a porch swing that Walter had built as a housewarming gift. She considered the question, her head resting against him. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I am. It's been so long I almost didn't recognize the feeling." Wyatt understood exactly what she meant. Happiness had been an elusive state for both of them, glimpsed occasionally but never fully grasped. Now it seemed within reach at last. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Zara sat up, turning to face him with curious eyes. "What is it?" Wyatt reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the starlight. "I had this made in Helena, before we left." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring, its band inscribed with a pattern of tiny stars. At its center sat a diamond, the same one Zara had given him that day on the mountain, now cut and polished to catch every available ray of light. "Zara McKenzie," Wyatt said, his heart pounding harder than it had during any gunfight, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Zara's eyes widened, then filled with tears that sparkled in the starlight. For a moment she couldn't speak, her hand covering her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. "The diamond," she finally managed. "You kept it." "Of course I did," Wyatt said softly. "It was a promise, even if neither of us knew it at the time." Zara took a deep breath, composing herself, then extended her left hand with a smile that outshone the stars. "Yes, Wyatt Morgan, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. It was a kiss of commitment, of certainty, of having finally found the place and the person worth stopping for. Their wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Silver Creek and the air was sweet with new beginnings. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the friends they'd made in town and presided over by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Zara wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered from Denver for the occasion, with a crown of white blossoms in her dark hair. Wyatt, uncomfortable in formal attire but willing to endure it for the day, wore a new suit that Walter had insisted on having tailored. "You clean up well, little brother," Walter observed as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "Almost look respectable." Wyatt adjusted his string tie, feeling strangled. "Don't get used to it. This is a one-time occurrence." Walter laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Wait until you see her. You'll forget all about being uncomfortable." He was right. When Zara appeared at the back of the small church, Wyatt forgot how to breathe. She walked toward him with steady steps, her eyes never leaving his, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth that said this was exactly where she wanted to be. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such conviction that many in the congregation were moved to tears. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a culmination and a beginning, the first of many as a married couple, but no less significant than that first tentative touch of lips in a Helena boarding house. Life in Silver Creek suited them both. The livery prospered under the Morgan brothers' management, with Wyatt's knowledge of horses complementing Walter's business acumen. Zara continued her work for the federal marshals, making occasional journeys to deliver important documents or testify in cases, but always returning to the home and husband who anchored her. Their first child, a daughter they named Willow, arrived a year after their wedding, bringing with her a joy neither had expected to experience. She had Zara's dark hair and Wyatt's blue eyes, and a spirit of independence that made both parents proud and occasionally exasperated. "She's just like her mother," Wyatt would say whenever Willow demonstrated particular stubbornness. "Oh no," Zara would counter with a smile, "that's all you, Cowboy." 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William Walter Morgan, named for the two men who had shaped their journey, Zara's first husband, whose memory she honored, and Walter, whose steadfast support had given them a place to build their life together. As the children grew, so did Silver Creek, evolving from a mining town to a respectable settlement with a school, a proper church, and even a small theater. Wyatt and Zara evolved too, their partnership deepening with each passing year, each challenge faced and overcome together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Zara with a trip back to the mountain cabin where they had sheltered during their flight from Blackwell's men. The old shepherd's shack had been abandoned for years, but Wyatt had quietly purchased the land and restored the cabin, turning it into a comfortable retreat. "Remember this place?" he asked as they approached on horseback, the children left in Walter and Sarah's capable care for the weekend. Zara nodded, her expression softening with memory. "How could I forget? I was half convinced we wouldn't survive the night. And now look at us," Wyatt said, dismounting and helping her down. 10 years, 2 children, and a life I never dared to imagine." Zara stepped into his embrace, her body fitting against his with the familiarity of years. "Was it worth it, putting down roots instead of continuing to drift every day?" Wyatt said without hesitation. "Every single day." They stood together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountainside that had once been their battlefield. So much had changed since that desperate night, the world around them, their circumstances, themselves. But one thing remained constant, as true now as it had been in that moment when their lips first met. She had been the first kiss he ever truly took, and she would be the only kiss this cowboy would ever want for the rest of his life. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Wyatt pulled Zara close and proved it once again.